I am here. Great. It's good to see you. It's been a long time.
Yeah, 2 weeks. I have somebody asked me today for specific examples of efforts to make Jews and non-Jews afraid of each other. And I didn't have any coming to mind, but it was something I observed happening. And then you said it in a lesson before I even needed to ask, because you noticed the very same thing happening. I wondered if you had any specific examples of that.
Well, what's the one? Did you hear me say a specific example, or I just said a general point and I didn't say a specific example?
I think you just said a general point. Pretty sure.
Well, how much through history do you want to go back?
I mean, recently, very recently, in America. That's all.
Well, there's the attempts by the Marxists to make the Jews afraid of the blacks. And that was successful in many cases, and you could read Rabbi Entelman's book, To Eliminate the Opiate. He discusses that there, this concept of the burning of the synagogues and so forth, and the attacks, and those just caused the Jewish people to withdraw in fear. Then you have in America, blaming that white supremacy is like the natural thinking of Americans, promoting these type of terrorist organizations. To remember, the whole point of terrorism is to create terror. It's a psychological warfare. It's not a physical warfare. So as long as the victims are the ones that are afraid of it, not the ones that are dead from it. That's what we have to understand. Terrorism, the victims are the ones that are afraid of the terrorism, not the ones that are dead from the terrorism. So the dead people are just the tools to get the fear in the ones that stay alive.
I love it. So clear. I'm on the same page.
You have that. You have the fear of the Arabs. Promoted by taking out of context and out of proportion attacks by Arabs against Jews, which completely loses the reality that most of the Arabs just wish the Jews in Israel would be strong enough to defeat the Marxists, defeat the terror groups. So what it does is, though, the terror again is meant to play with the minds of the living. So those are examples. I mean, you have, and then cover the blacks, the white supremacists. Those are the, and then of course you have the legacy issues. Germans, Poles, created mythology created about the Germans and about the Poles as all being anti-Semitic. Is that helpful?
Yeah. And you were talking about Rabbi Entelman's book. You said Ethiopian something rather?
To eliminate, ELIMINATE, eliminate the opiate, OPIATE, eliminate the opiate.
Oh.
That if you haven't read that yet, that's a must read. That's the fundamental primer of all understanding of the secret societies and so forth that have made war against Judaism. And once you understand that, you'll see what's going on.
And when you're talking about white supremacy groups, are you referring to basically the idea that the FBI has been making these groups happen and running them and creating them and organizing them in order to make people think that religious and conservative and Constitution-liking patriotic Americans are against Jews? Is that basically the idea?
Right. So the extent of what the FBI knows, the agents in the FBI know and don't know, I don't know as to what their intentions are, but it's definitely they know they are actively promoting these groups and actively organizing them and have informants. And the head of the Proud Boys is police informer. So he was already a police informer before he became the creator of and the founder of Proud Boys. So do the individual FBI agents understand exactly what they're doing? I can't speak to that, but definitely the net effect is promoting white supremacists into more and more extreme activities, and then cooperating in the kind of the media campaign to build them up into something. It's very interesting also, by the way, that there's a Richard Spencer, who is the head of or was the head of that other organization called the alt-right, some alt-right organization. He was in Charlottesville and stuff like that. His wife, or former wife, is explicitly a member of the KGB or Soviet military intelligence, because not only is she Russian and she have a Russian name and she speaks Russian and she came from Russia in recent times, and she happens to be the operator of this guy. But in addition, she is what is her job? She's a military archivist, military historian with access to the KGB files and military intelligence files, and she translates them. So there's no such person that exists that's not a member of those organizations. Meaning to say, she's not like some sort of college student that just has an interest in history and has access to these files. She's clearly a member of the Russian intelligence apparatus, and she was the wife of the guy who is running the the one that the media built up to be representing the alt-right in America. So when you take the combined operations of the local intelligence and security services to promote anti-Semitic organizations and these foreign organizations like the KGB and so forth, then now you start to see what's really going on. That it's not just a spontaneous guy sitting in his backyard, barbecuing one day. He decides that he doesn't like Jews and he's going to organize his friends to get to make an anti-Jewish organization. That's not what's happening, or anti-black or anything else. These are not. That's not the way it's happening. In fact, there's a book called Clandestine with a K from the 1950s or 1960s, where the FBI at the time, which was actually working against Marxist infiltration in the States, they had an FBI operative in the Ku Klux Klan, and the book conclusively shows that the Ku Klux Klan was being run by the communists. So again, it's all about creating conflict. It's all about infiltration and creating the appearance that there is this terrible lurking enemy out there that people then start to believe, so that they have, and then they control both sides. Interestingly enough, by the way, Mayor Hana says in his biography that he was an operative for the FBI. So he's the Jewish, presenting himself as a Jewish position on responding to the anti-Jewish positions allegedly of Arabs, but it turns out they're both working for the same side. And he also had this other, I've heard them, I don't know them well enough to repeat them, but there's some unfortunate details of his background which are completely contradictory to the way that he's being presented. And what is his policy? What is his position? His position is not a Torah position. His position is, drive all the Arabs out of Israel. Well, there's no such Torah position, because as a matter of fact, the Torah says that even with regards to the Canaanite residents of the Holy Land that had to be driven out, if they agreed, you had to offer them, we just learned this in the Rambam 2 days ago, you had to offer them the opportunity to make peace And peace will look like giving them the opportunity to forswear idolatry, and to accept upon themselves the 7 laws of Noah, all the commandments that apply to the non-Jews, and to take a secondary role in the operation of society, and not try to make it into a to supersede the stewardship of the Jewish people in the Holy Land, and be contribute their portion of whatever the taxes were and so forth. So that goes to the extent that even the Rambam even writes, even Amalek had that has to be offered that opportunity, because, and so there's a big question about that. What does it mean? How can Amalek be offered that opportunity? It doesn't say you have to destroy Amalek. So the answer is that, well, if a person from Amalek decides to accept upon himself the 7 laws of Noah and to live in the Holy Land in accordance with God Almighty's vision for the Holy Land, and in support of the Jewish people's stewardship of the Holy Land, he's no longer a member of Amalek, so he doesn't need to be destroyed. So the point here is that the concept of the Holy Land is not about driving people out just because they're not part of the Jewish people. On the contrary, the people who are willing to abide according to what God Almighty's vision is are allowed to stay. And so Meir Kahana's way of presenting the Torah position is a very appealing idea, because the militant, look at these murderous Arab terrorists drive all the Arabs out. He'll quote some verses out of context to try to support that. But what's being missed is the point is that the reason that the Marxist terrorists exist among the Arabs is because the Israeli government is allowing them to fester, is supporting them, and is allowing these to grow and to operate. Although there's all these spectacular operations to assassinate one guy or here or there, but that's the fool of the Israeli population, both the Jewish and the Arab population, because incredibly enough, with all those assassinations, the number of communist soldiers and terrorist operatives in the Holy Land and in Lebanon and these other countries multiplies and multiplies and multiplies. So all these assassinations have zero effect on actual war preparedness, and zero effect on actual the status of the war against the Jewish people, and the war against all the people in the Holy Land and the nations around. So there's a lot of deception going on, and the way that you operate the deception is you get people confused to choose between two extremes. So you have, the Marxist PLO says they're going to drive the entire Jewish population into the sea. So the opposing viewpoint, and then they do some terrible acts of murder of Arabs and Jews. More Arabs they kill than Jews they kill, because they're terrorizing the Arab population into submission to this Marxist revolution. And then on the other hand, you have a guy like Hana gets up and he says, drive all the Arabs out of Israel. So now, which side are you going to take, right? I mean, obviously, if you're inclined to support the Jewish people, you feel the only two alternatives is Kahana. You're not going to support the Arabs, terrorists driving the Jews out, so you're going to support Kahana. So that seems to make sense. But they're both false positions. The reality is that the 99+% of the Arab population wants the Jewish people to be strong, does not want the Marxist terrorists in their midst. And what the Jewish people want is to fulfill what God Almighty's commandment is, to bring the whole world to the knowledge of the Creator. Not interested in driving people out and forcibly uprooting them. If they fled, do they have to be brought back? I don't know. That's a separate question. But if they voluntarily left because they were misled by their own leadership, that they were going to be harmed by the Jewish people in the different wars, there's a lie. And they fled. So maybe they abandoned their properties. Maybe they abandoned that. That's a separate question. But to take people who are living peaceably and productively in the Holy Land and willing to observe God Almighty's commandments, There's no source for throwing them out of the land. So when we start to pay attention, we see that in these different crises and these different conflicts and these different hostilities, we see how we're being fed a whole series of lies. And it's very, very difficult to come and say the truth. Because what I believe the Torah's position is, and the Rabbis' position is, and I would say this, and I hope to get around to writing a Substack article on this, but there's no, I would say, take the position that there's no such thing as anti-Semitism in America. You only have two pockets of anti-Semitism, which are the very Marxist colleges, which by definition, and the surrounding areas in the big cities, Marxism that seeks to eliminate any practitioners of religion. And then you have these quote unquote white supremacist groups, which are infiltrated and run into greater and greater extremism by government operatives and agents and so forth. So the average American is not an anti-Semite. The vast majority of Americans are not anti-Semitic. Almost the entire population is not anti-Semitic. They may not like strangers, but I have news for you. If you go to rural parts of the United States of America and you say you're from New York City, a white American from New York City is not going to have an easy time moving into a rural part of West Virginia. Or I don't want to say West Virginia particularly because I haven't been there, but I'm saying let's scratch that part. But rural America, if you walk in as an outsider from downstate or upstate or the next state, you're going to be treated as an outsider, and people are going to be very suspicious of you. What kind of ideas are you bringing in? What kind of practices are you bringing in? Are you coming to unseat the historical order? You have a few families that have been the county commissioners and the city township commissioners and the sheriff and the deputy sheriffs for decades and centuries already. They don't like outsiders. So if a Jewish guy walks in, he's an outsider. Not that they're anti-Semitic, they don't like outsiders. So, but he gets misportrayed because if a Jewish guy moves in and they don't give him the time of the day, let's say, it's not because he's Jewish, it's because he's an outsider. And they're all outsiders are treated with suspicion. So that's what we have to realize, that the people are good, people are kind, people are generous. And if you come in as a brash outsider, you're a New Jerseyan or a Massachusetts guy, and you walk in but tell a bunch of farmers how you think things should be run in their area of the state, they're not going to be happy. But if you come in with humility and say, I want to learn, and what could I contribute to this community? What could I learn? They're going to welcome anybody. In fact, for them, that's the greatest, opportunity for them to show their centuries of experience and expertise, and they're happy to welcome new people. So that's really what the issue is. It's being manufactured in our minds, and the real reason is to cause us into greater and greater isolation, greater and greater fright. Very interesting if you pay close attention. There's these very I think they call them the Hebrew Israelites. There's different groups, but there's like a very militant black anti-Semitic group, and they have different names. So I don't know exactly which title is the one that claims to be peaceable, and one claims to be for violence and so on. But the point is that the people that the man and the woman that did the executions in Jersey City in December of 2019, or was it early 2020? What was the effect? You see, whenever you see terrorism, like we said before, terrorism is not about terrorizing those that get killed, it's about terrorizing those that remain alive. So the goal is to terrorize them so that they'll move into some sort of reactive response. If you go back to let's say the attacks in India, it was just before an election. Now, we as Westerners don't know the effect that it had. The same thing if you look in Spain, before critical elections, there'll be a train exploding. In Israel, before key Knesset votes, there'll be increase in terrorist attacks or trying to get people to accept some sort of surrender. In America, there'll be terrorist attacks that will then promote a response, whether it's greater financial scrutiny by the government or greater, restriction on people's ability to defend themselves and so forth. There's always a response. There's always a response that people are meant to be pushed into. So if you take a look at, people will clamor for more government, more police power, more government protection, bring the military into the streets, whatever can be done, whatever they wants to be justified as the next vote. This is how Hitler took power. He created, together with Stalin, who supported him coming to power, and they created fights between the two branches of the communists, the Nazis and the International Socialists, the National Socialists versus the International. It created violence in the streets, and then that people were so distraught they asked for the government to be strong, and the only man who could show that he was going to be strong, other than the Marxist, was Hitler. So that's how he was able to, on a claim of law and order, that's how he's come to power. So what is the intended response over here in each one of these types of situations? So the Jewish people in America are expanding by leaps and bounds, thank God, the religious communities. And they're moving out of very compact, very small areas in the big cities like New York and so forth. And they're expanding all over the place. And they're getting these little nucleuses built in different communities. And then like Jersey City, Linden, Union, Bayonne, all through New Jersey. So, okay, there's some tension between some neighbors don't like the gentrification. That's people are coming along or offering to buy their houses, and if because of a popular neighborhood, and you're gonna get 5 knocks on your door every day if you want to sell your house. Okay, I can understand that causes, that's an outsider thing and causes some tension. But the use of murderous violence by these people who are connected to these Marxist terrorist groups that are they're black using the Marxist label, just like you have white supremacists that are Marxists using the white supremacy label, and they're all behind the scenes coordinated. They launched this attack on the Jewish people in Jersey City. Now, what's the point of that? Again, it's not the point to unload a certain number of bullets and kill a certain number of people in the store. That those people are dead now, and there's no effect. That has no value. Killing people has no value, except in very, limited circumstances. If you happen to have the entire army of your opponent is, 10,000 guys, and you theoretically kill them all. Okay, that would make sense from a military perspective. But generally, in military terms, what you want to do is kill as few people as possible, the enemy, in order to cause terror in the enemy, so the enemy will surrender. Right? We've talked about Hiroshima and the attacks, the atomic attacks on Japan. They only had 2 nuclear bombs. There was nothing behind that threat, but it was enough to cause the crumbling of what was until then unwilling to surrender. So here, if you could attack these outlying Jewish communities, then the Jews, according to the plan, would then say, oh, they want to stay in the big communities, so they won't spread out as much. The more decentralized the Jews become, the harder it is to take any action against them. Centralization of people is the key to control. So if you go back to how did the Germans work? How did the Nazis work? They would go into these, create instigation against the Jews in rural communities to drive them out of the rural communities, attacks, violence, threats. People would flee from the outlying communities and move themselves into the big cities. How did the Nazis sell the Jews on leaving very good relationships with their non-Jewish neighbors, very good circumstances throughout Europe? They told them that the only safety they had is that they would obey. The Nazis were there to protect them, and they had to be taken into the ghettos in order to protect them from these rabid anti-Semitic non-Jews that supposedly exist. But how did the Jews come to the impression that they existed? Because they had all this anti-Semitic propaganda the Nazis created directed at the Jews to think that the general population was hostile. And then if you add a few stone throwings and burnings and attacks and murders and so forth, then people get the real impression that this is really a hostile world. And then they just said to them, get on the trains and you're going to go to the ghettos. And they moved people into the ghettos. So they actually moved into a place that was labeled as safety, but was extremely dangerous because they now no longer had their own properties. They no longer had their own houses, didn't have their own access to food production. And they were now under complete German police control. It was all calculated. It was all a psychological warfare. So that, I believe, is what's behind the Jersey City attack. And interestingly enough, there was also an attack in Hanukkah time in Muncie, New York, where a fellow went in and knifed a bunch of people in a synagogue in Muncie. Now, what the police and the intelligence service always talk about, these lone wolves, lone wolves, lone wolves. Well, there's really, that's, I mean, there are people who have crazy attacks, but I don't believe in that there's really these lone wolf attacks. What there is there's an undercurrent of instigation of people, and they're groomed through what they read and through what they hear and so forth, and then they are primed into taking action. But the way that it's done is so subtle and sophisticated that the police and services can't detect it or are unwilling to detect it because they are not properly infiltrated into those terrorist organizations. So they don't understand the signals. They don't understand how people are being primed. So when the person takes the actual action, he gets the kind of like the goading to go into that attack, there's no real trace of that such and such a control operative in a cell told him, now you have this mission. There's no paper trail. So therefore they say it's a lone wolf. But what you do is you look for who did they attack and why? They didn't attack, if they wanted to kill a lot of Jews, God forbid, why didn't they go into a big community with a lot of people? Because that would have caused the Jews from there to flee. The communities are no longer safe. Flee to let's all leave Brooklyn. Let's go find 400 new communities to start. So what do? They attack the outlying communities where bullet for bullet, there's a tiny number of people to attack. And that goal is to get the Jewish people to say, I want to stay with the safety with numbers. I want to retract from the expansion. I want to stay in a central area. So what's that attack then used to do? The way the media portrays it, and you look at the media, there was a lot of, how do I know about the neighbors were complaining about the number of people knocking their doors? Because the media played up this idea of a hostile reaction to the Jews moving into Jersey City. And they made sure to give that equal play to the attack. So now if you're a Jewish family sitting in a large Jewish family, a large Jewish community, you can't really afford the housing anymore because it's so much in demand. You say to your wife or kids and you say, let's get together, let's go with a few families to a small area. Oh, but there's a lot of hostility out there. Oh, but look what happened. Look, that's what it's intended to accomplish. And it's very effective. So that's why the Torah teaches us we have to make our decisions based on what God Almighty wants, not based on our sensory perception of what's being presented to us as reality. Because if we base our decisions on that, what we're going to do is, well, how do I know what the residents of Jersey City are saying? Well, I saw in the paper. But that's because a reporter chose those particular people to interview and played their statements in a certain way. Whereas if I was to go into these cities and meet people directly, I would find that there's a whole wide range of views. Some people are so happy that the Jews are coming. Some people wish the Jews weren't coming. There's a whole wide range of viewpoints, and none of those rise to the level of murder. But the murderous attack, the terrorism, is meant to terrorize us, the living. And that's why it's so important to learn the Torah. Because the Torah is not, you see, a lot of people are into conspiracy theories. The problem with being into conspiracy theories is not that they're not conspiracies, the Torah is full of conspiracies. But if you get into the details of the conspiracy theory, you also lose sight of the reality. Because the world then becomes a hostile place. There's the conspiracy actors that are controlling the masses, and the masses are all at the whims of the controllers, and it's all hostile. So we have to step beyond all that. We have to learn the Torah. And the Torah tells us that every single human being is created in God Almighty's divine image. Even the guy who's the head of the conspiracy, wearing the Nazi uniform, the Marxist uniform, whatever uniform he's wearing, whatever he's spewing from his mouth, even the guy who's standing on the street corner, shouting that all the Jews should, be put in an oven, God forbid. That person is created in God Almighty's divine image. It's irrelevant to me what he's saying, because I don't look at him as the spewer of those words. I look at him what he really is, because if I study Torah and I see that he's really created in God Almighty's image, what in the world could it possibly matter what he's saying? What he's saying is a distraction from his real mission in the world. But for me, I can't get distracted from my mission in the world. My mission in the world is to reach him. Now, he may shout, scream, throw something, spit at me, whatever he wants, but that's not relevant to me. We learn together in our learning on the trust and faith. We're learning about, I think it was Elisha, who said, let all the people who oppose me, he's the prophet of God, and he says, let all those oppose me come and hit me right in my chest or my face. Like, come, I'm not even going to turn away from you. Okay, so when we take the Torah into ourselves, and it connects with the part that's innately built into us, that God Almighty, creating us in his divine image, he built into us the recognition of what's true and the understanding of what's true, and that ability to hear the God Almighty's divine voice, then we don't see the world according to the way it's being reported to us. We see the world according to the Torah. Torah tells us that the world is completely 100% redeemable. Every single human being is redeemable. No matter how many check marks he has on his rifle of how many people he's murdered, God forbid, he can change direction completely in an instant. And this is what the Lubavitch Rebbe drives home. Where today's was Koyach Nissen. The Rebbe is saying, do everything you can to bring Mashiach. I've done everything I can to get you to want to bring Mashiach. I'm turning it over to you to do everything you can to get to bring Mashiach, to want to bring Mashiach and bring Mashiach. The first thing we have to be able to do to want to bring Mashiach is we have to be able to change completely the way that we look at the world. We have to look at the world like the world is ready. Every human being is 100% at the cusp of expressing only divine concepts, to being a wellspring of God Almighty's divine wisdom. So we don't buy all the left versus the right and this people, those are that, and all these terminologies, the liberals and the conservatives. Those are all irrelevant terminologies for us. We're not part of that. We are here to spread God Almighty's message in the world and to see through all the lies. Once you know the truth of the Torah, it doesn't even become so relevant, the details of what we were talking about before. Which Marxist organization is controlling this group? Which Marxist organization? How do they do it? What's their mission? What's their plan? Because not that it doesn't matter, because they're causing tremendous human suffering and they're trying last-ditch attempt to fight against God Almighty. I'm not dismissing the fact that they're causing tremendous human suffering and prolonging the exile. But from a data perspective, if I am correctly grounded in the Torah, then I know anyone that's speaking negatively of others, like we learned in this week's Torah portion, Tazria-Metzora, is all about speaking negatively about others. If you're person is trying to drive divisions, I don't need to know exactly which secret organization or intelligence service he works for. I know that it's not Torah, so it's false. If he's promoting inaction, dissuading people from action, I know it's not Torah, because Torah tells me we have to take action. If he's saying, look at the, like we're talking about, look at the blacks are dangerous, the Arabs are dangerous, the white supremacists are dangerous, all those people are dangerous, let's stick to ourselves. I know it's falsehood. Where he got his information, who put it in his head, how they crafted it, all those kind of things fall to the wayside, because I know that he's spreading a false image, a false message, and a false message is warfare. False message is warfare against God, and is a warfare against the people of the world. Now, if I want to spend time and I want to learn and see the connection of all behind all the Marxist organizations and how they're all connected and how they work together and how they're commonly funded and all that kind of stuff, and there's people who've written books on that. It's important information if a person is fighting unable to understand. His naivete is so strong, he doesn't realize that, he thinks that, well, since all these people are like seemingly separately speaking the same things of negativity, it must represent some real movement in humanity. Okay, so then explain to him that there's a connection between them and they all work together and they use these front organizations and they use the media. And okay, so it doesn't really represent anybody. But it's still not going to help the person unless he's grounded in this absolute certainty that there's nothing besides God Almighty. Because I've seen people who've come to great deep understandings of the nature of Amalek's fight against God and fight against trying to plunge the world into darkness and to work against the human enterprise, which is happening 24 hours a day around us. But they've spun into despair, because when you start paying attention to all the details and how many they're murdering 70 million babies a year with abortions in the world, you could go to these counters that are talking about how many tens of thousands every minute that you're, every hour. I don't look at the exact numbers over there. I mean, how are you going to keep up with it if you really are sensitive to what's going on? It's unbearable. That's what we have to be screaming out Ad Messiah. Until when? We can't tolerate this exile anymore. So that was saying we have to scream it out with a true, sincere sense of this is impossible. Not just that I don't like the fact that the temperature is too high or the taxes are too high or whatever it is, but I don't really care about the abortions. No, every detail of the tremendous torture of the suffering of human beings has to, God Almighty, this is absolutely unacceptable. We don't stand for this a minute more. We want Mashiach now. We have to be completely infused with it. And how are we going to then take that infusion and go through with energy to breaking through our own internal exile? Because God Almighty is always calling us out of our exile. There's no gap between us and redemption. It's just that we're stuck in our thinking that we're stuck in the exile. We're stuck in that thinking of exile. There's big forces over here. There's a lot of troops over there. There's this army has this many things. These people are thinking like this. And you accept the way the world is presented to you, then you just stay in exile. Let's make it as comfortable as possible. How big a house can we build? How nice a barbecue can we have? Even in Torah things, how much Torah study can we do? But the rest of the outside world, we can't do anything about, because we bought the lie that it is as it's being made to appear to us. But if we really learn the Torah and follow the examples of the real leaders of the Jewish people, that the example of the Lubavitch Rabbis, and their complete commitment to see the world according to the way the Torah sees it and the way the prophets see it, that the entire world wants Mashiach now. And like the Lubavitch Rebbe says, even the most ardent opponent of what we're teaching right now, of the Torah teaching, even the most ardent opponent himself will become the biggest supporter of the Jewish people and of Torah and of Judaism and spreading the message of God Almighty to the entire world. He will become the biggest supporter. Right now, he's passionately fuming against God and against the Jews and against the Torah. But as soon as he sees that we see him as creating God Almighty's divine image, that he is nothing but a creation, that God Almighty is lovingly creating him at every moment, and we are here to help him, right the way he is right now, then it's gonna touch his heart, it's gonna touch his soul. And that's why we have to be the ones to keep saying this, carry this message. We cannot retreat. We cannot go prepare our bunker and say, I'm ready to survive whatever goes wrong, because that's abandoning the rest of humanity. We can't say nothing's going wrong, I'm just going to stay here, everything's going to be fine, because somehow, the United States of America lasted 250 years. I guess it's going to continue like that forever. That's irresponsible and makes no sense and has no historical precedent. So we can't, these are different options that people take, but they're all not according to Torah. The Torah says we have to remain engaged in society. We have to go headfirst into the world and talk to the world from soul to soul, from our soul to their soul, and let them know exactly what we're teaching here, what the Torah is teaching, that there's a loving creator that's every instant creating every single one of these wonderful human beings from nothing into something. And ultimately, that message, and it should be speedily, that message is going to reach every single human being. And that's what Mashiach and redemption looks like. So, John, I know it's a long answer to your question, but that's the full context. And just to relate it, and I'm happy if anyone else wants to speak up and ask questions, but on this subject or anything else. But it's interesting. I was having I was thinking about how we're going to learn the Torah portion this week, because over the years, if you go back into the videos, you see we've covered the parsha, we've covered the subject of the parsha and the general context of the parsha. So there's two ways we can approach the learning. Or three ways. We could continue that. We could say, okay, there's new people here who haven't learned before. We could just go through again, chapter and verse, say the highlights of the Torah portion. We could say to the newcomers, okay, watch the video from last year. Now we're going to go into a deeper level, go into some of the deeper meanings of the Torah portion. Or we could take an approach of saying, how do we take at the highest level, how do we take what the Torah portion is teaching us and apply it to this incredible energy that we have to bringing God Almighty's message to the entire world? And so by divine providence, I think we ended up with the third. I wasn't sure which way to do it. I was just asking God for guidance, and that we ended up with a third approach tonight, because what are we saying over here? The Torah portion is telling us that a person who speaks negatively about other people's it has to be excluded from the community. He gets a psoriasis, he gets a skin condition that reveals to the whole community what's really in his heart, and what's really in his mind, and what his real intentions are. And then he has to be sent out of the camp and go through a whole humbling process of reintegration into the camp, into the community. So why does the Torah go to such again and again, and then he has to, at the very end, he has to shave off all the hair on his body. So now, not only did he have to tell everyone that he was impure and so on and so forth, but now he's going to go walking around for months and years. Everyone's going to see, look how this guy's hair's still coming in. They're going to know what he did. Because that type of attitude destroys the entire world. When you're thinking negatively about anybody else, what are you really doing? You're really failing to acknowledge your own insecure thought about yourself, and you're clawing to bring somebody else down. He's too tall, he's too short, she's too this, she's too that. He prays too much, he prays too little. Everything has some way to show the differences and to create the divide between the people. Those people are like that. Those who are. This is exactly how this is the fractures and the tendencies which the Marxists manipulate to rile people up into these class warfares and into these wars of national liberation. So you have the Basques against the Spanish and the French Canadians against the English Canadians, and you have the Jews, the Arabs against the Jews, and the Jews, then the Jewish response groups against the Arabs, and all these things are just, and everyone looks at them and they start to make sense, because look, these people are terrible. Look, those people are terrible. So everyone's got someone else that's terrible, and it makes sense that we're all upset at the terrible people. But the reality is that's all because we lose sight, and each one of us loses sight, and we dehumanize other people by labeling them those people. If you call someone those Democrats or those Republicans, you are labeling a whole segment of population and basically delegitimizing. You call them those liberals or those conservatives, whatever it is, whatever terminology you use, you are like pushing those people away. They are those people. Now, you could feel very patriotic about it. You could think that you are somehow championing the right thing, but the end result is actually bringing destruction. Because there's no such thing as those people. First of all, every single person is a complete individual. He's an entire world. There's no way to group any of these people that are each one an entire world into one group. Each one has his own independent thought process, agrees with some of the things that you're labeling with, and doesn't agree with other things, and and when you label him, what you're actually doing is you are writing him off. I'm not talking to him. He's beyond redemption. So what do you need to do? You need to say, I just got to scrap all that thinking. And they play at us innocently. Because if I'm agitated by what I'm seeing around me, and they're going to say, oh, it's those people that are doing it, and it's this administration, and it's that administration, and it's that, it's all a bunch of just theatrics in order to confuse us and to get us into this state of strife. And here's the other key. When you come to politics, why this is so destructive is because if you believe that it's because it's the people wearing the blue or the people wearing the red, then you imagine that with the next election, if your party wins, it's somehow going to improve. What we don't realize is that the parties are just presentations of almost very similar ideologies, just a few steps apart from each other. And nothing changes really fundamentally changes. People might get a different energy and a different enthusiasm and so on, but it doesn't really change the direction of the country in a fundamental way. Why? Because the forces of division are at work. They don't care who gets elected. You see, there's all this talk about the so-and-so's manipulated the election in favor of this person, and then they tried to manipulate the elections in favor of that person. Okay. The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to anybody who wins, because it's all about creating the strife and the division and the conflict and the demoralization. So it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. So we cannot get caught up in those battles. We cannot get caught up in the class warfare and the political warfare and the ideological stuff. We have to get caught up in Torah and say, there's only one message for every single human being. I don't care what flag you're wearing right now. It doesn't matter to me, because I'm here to talk to you about your soul, which is beyond being contaminated by the Enlightenment, thinking. It's beyond being contaminated by your Marxist training. It's beyond being contaminated by the hateful, strifeful ideas that you either grew up with or you've been adopting since you've been watching such and such a commentator on the news. And that's all irrelevant to me. Let's just talk about your soul. That's untarnished and it is eternal. It's coming from the very first human being, Adam and Eve. They were created God Almighty's divine image, and we are their continuation. And we are here to focus on that. That's why we have to talk to people. That's why, but we first have to see them that way. We have to see the world that way. And I'll make one final conclusion over here. If you're a person that cares, then you probably think a lot about, well, what's the right thing to do? And a lot of people get swept up in, out of desperation, of what looks like is going to be the right thing, or what's the most urgent message that needs to be, people need to be warned about and stuff like that. But, and it's all well-meaning. But we have to look at really what's the root cause of all this, and what's the only real solution to all this. And what God Almighty's message to the Jewish people is that the Jewish people are called God Almighty's the witnesses to God Almighty in the world, meaning to say that through all the imagine we've been in exile now for 2,000 years. And still holding on to preserving the authentic message of the Torah, even with all the attempts to knock it off track from within the Jewish people, and all the infiltrations and all the genocides and attacks and so forth, still keeping the Torah on track. Well, first of all, how's it possible to stay on track if so many people are confused? Because the truth always resonates, because it's already built into every single person. So it can't be extinguished, because someone's going to pick it up and say it, and then other people are going to say, yeah, that makes sense. I recognize that. But the key here is that why it has to be a Torah-based penetration of God Almighty's message into the world in a revealed way is that it has to have that ability to ignore what everyone else thinks is reality. If you just were to write a book of your good ideas about the way civilization should be and people should conduct themselves and so forth, you'll print a few copies and people put it, some people will be sympathetic and put it on the shelf. But in order for it to prevail, it has to come with the heritage, with the reality of the ability to prevail and to stay true to it, no matter what the circumstances are. That's the level of commitment, and that's what the Jewish people represent. That's why are we the witnesses to God Almighty's existence. You could sit in outside one day and you could realize that there's a God. So it's not to say that there's a God in the world is not like an original thing to the Jewish people. It's not like you couldn't figure it out yourself. But what's the gift that God Almighty is pointing to and saying that you are my witnesses? You are my witnesses that this message of the inherent goodness and the ultimate goodness of every single human being can carry through and prevail no matter what is going around us in the world, because you are willing to ignore what everyone else is paying attention to. And that's what we have to inculcate in ourselves, is the willingness to ignore all the signs, all the bad omens, or whatever else you want to call it, all these different things that are being promoted to us as the sounds of war and it's too late and look what's happening, all this kind of stuff. These are all lies. And it's all coming from people who may be well-meaning. Some are just there to create hysteria and strife, because that's the goal of Amalek. And they're participating in that knowingly or unknowingly. Other people just are worked up, panicked, fearful, alarming. They're alarmed and they mean well. But that's our job is not to join them in being alarmed and being fearful. Our job is to know that God Almighty is running every single thing in existence. And lovingly, to ourselves and to our family members and to everyone around us, say, we're not in any way affected by what's going on. We are not going to change one iota. We are going to continue to persevere in carrying God Almighty's message until we reach every single human being. And one other message I want to share on this subject before we conclude is that when you understand this in context, then every detail of every trial and tribulation that we are facing in our lives become so insignificant. What your wife said to you, or what your husband said to you, or the look they gave you, or the feeling you have, and all these kind of things that we can be led into following all these false understandings of reality and misread the signals, and we can maybe even have accurate information as the signals, but misinterpret what we're supposed to do with it. That will spiral us into conflict. In the places where we have to have the greatest purity of keeping our minds clear, and that's in our own families. Our job is to create peace. In order to have peace in the world, we have to have peace in our families. But to build families, we have to have peace in our families. And we have to have the greatest and develop the greatest love and understanding for the person and the people that we live with. Because even if we think we're right and they're 100% wrong, that's how God Almighty tells us how to interact with people. Tells us to interact with them, with ourselves and with them, by looking and seeing what the truth of them is. And the truth is that they're created in God Almighty's divine image. And there's nothing more incredible and wonderful than that. Even while they're saying something that you don't agree with or you don't like the way they're saying it. So if we stay focused on that, and stay focused on that when we see ourselves in the mirror, and when we think about ourselves, when we think about our spouses, when we think about our children, then we can create entire armies of people who see the world this way, and entire communities of people that see things this way and see the world this way. And that's how we can precipitate the redemption of the entire world. Ourselves, from our own internal exiles, and every other human being from the general exile. Ourselves included in that redemption too. So God bless you all. And we'll continue tomorrow morning. We have 10 o'clock, the Ma'amar B'tochen, and the Beis Levi. And then tomorrow night, the Gate of Oneness. So thank you all for being here. And it's time to go practice what we're preaching in the home, and then in our family members and extended family members in the world around us. And we shall have Mashiach now. God bless you all.